Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward, and this is Face to Face. Our guest this week is North Wind Standing Woman Isabel Daniels. Isabel, who is from Saugeen First Nation in Manitoba, has been advocating for murdered and missing Indigenous peoples for the last 14 years. She is an MMIWG family member and a survivor of human trafficking and childhood sexual exploitation. Isabel helped create Velma's House in Winnipeg, the only designated 24/7 safe space for vulnerable and exploited women. With an education background in social work and trauma therapy, in recent years she has been advocating for murdered and missing Indigenous men and boys. Isabel, thanks so much for being with us on the show this week.
Yeah, thank you.
The issue of missing and murdered Indigenous boys and men is something you and I have been talking about trying to do something on for a while. And interestingly enough, you weren't the only one who reached out during the holidays saying that this is something that we should be talking more about. I guess for starters, why is this an issue that's become so important for you?
For me, just because of working with families of MMIW, families of murdered and missing Indigenous men have reached out and asked if I would be able to support them in their vigils and getting some advocacy for their cases. And at that time, I was employed at certain organizations, and under my mandate, I wasn't able to support these families because they weren't murdered and missing Indigenous women. So from there, I started doing some research and found out that there isn't an organization, Indigenous organization in Manitoba that supports the families of murdered and missing Indigenous men and boys.
Did that come, as Manitoba is ground zero for MMIWG, you would think that there might be an organization for men and boys here?
Yeah, for me, I think that it's, people don't realize that we're only supporting one half of our people. And I've said this before, but there's a ripple effect of all these children and these parents and these families that don't get the healing supports that the family of our murdered and missing women do. We don't ever see, not that often do we see leadership at cases of murdered men. Where's the media attention for those cases as well? And then for our men that are killed by law enforcement, they're not considered victims. So those families don't get to access victim services because they're considered suspects. And so that's even less supports that are given to those families of those people that are taken.
Right. Well, you recently facilitated engagement sessions for the upcoming annual gathering for missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys. How did those sessions go?
It was a lot of tears, a lot of hard conversations with the families, just having to sit and listen to their hurt, listen to how they feel, how they're not supported by community. When they do ask for help, they're always told that they don't provide supports for murdered and missing Indigenous men. Where's the supports for their sons when they were alive and on this earth? There's no safe spaces. They really feel unheard, and they feel like community doesn't really care that their sons are murdered or missing.
The gathering's theme is recognize them, find them. Can you tell us about that?
I actually went to Wabadi. He was an elder that actually just recently passed. Right. And I went there for guidance on how to do this work in a good way. And the message from the ancestors was that we need to recognize them and find them, not so much in the literal sense, but we need to give those spirits space, and we need to recognize that they're missing and that they're murdered, and do a ceremony to send them off in a good way and to make sure that they travel well into that spirit world.
Speaking of doing it in a good way, there is a lot of ceremony that takes place there. When you look at the poster, can you speak to some of the importance of that?
Another thing that we did hear from the families when we did do the family engagement session is that there's no ceremony space for them. I mean, people are doing things at an individual level, and they're finding their way to ceremony on their own. But as a community, as a whole, they don't feel that our nations and our communities are giving them that space to heal like we do for our murdered and missing Indigenous women. We have round dances, we have memorial dates, we had an inquiry, we had all these things, and every single one of our Indigenous organizations hold space and ceremony and programs for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit people, and all those things are needed. But what we need to do is provide those same supports to the families of our murdered and missing Indigenous men, and to our men who are still struggling in gang exploitation, generational trauma, incarceration, CFS. All of that plays a part into where our men are in our family structure.
Right.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, there was a walk in Winnipeg this past spring. I think it happens annually recently. About 100 family members and others came out calling for more awareness about this. Why do you think it doesn't get the attention that it deserves?
I think people still have a lot of negative stereotypes about Indigenous men. When we first started all the advocacy for our women, there was very negative stereotypes about how we were portrayed when our lives were taken, and the headlines in the news were not positive. And right now we still have those negative stereotypes of our men, and when you're painting a whole race of people under a certain kind of brush. People just tend to turn a blind eye. And another thing I also think that we need to talk about is if we're not healing our men and giving our men space to take their and reclaim their place in our society and our family structure, that if we're only healing one half of our people, then the community doesn't change, and our women are going back to sometimes abusive relationships, and then around and around we go with this negative cycle for our people.
I'm going to come back to some of that. Wanted to touch on the fact that you testified at the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls here in Winnipeg to speak about your cousin Nicole Daniels.
Mm-hmm.
I guess maybe first, any reflection on that testimony and that inquiry, and whether you feel it was worth the time.
I feel that it woke a lot of people up. I feel that we're still a very long way away from any kind of significant change for our women, and we still deal with a lot of institutional racism. I've said it before, I think that there needs to be change in our leadership and the people that are running these programs and services for our people. We need new and fresh young people with new ideas and innovative ways to create supports and services, and to be self-sufficient too, right? We're very reliant on government funding as of right now, and we're bright, brilliant people, and we have it in us to create self-sustainable ways to heal ourselves.
What types of changes do you think should happen?
I think people should work together. I think that people need to just stop being so political when it comes to helping people who are marginalized, who are living in, oppression or poverty or unsheltered. We're really in a policing state of our society, and it's almost like the deserving and undeserving poor, and people are picking and choosing who is worthy of their help and their time. And if we just work together as a collective and share information and share resources, if my organization doesn't do this but yours does, then why don't we create a partnership so we can bridge those gaps in between where our people are falling through, sadly.
Yeah, that brings up a lot of things. I've heard a lot of people talking recently about, this whole economy around vulnerable homeless people and stuff like that.
Yep.
Different combo to have for sure. Ahead of the inquiry, there was a lot of talk of some people were advocating that men and boys should have been included in the inquiry. Do you think that would have been beneficial?
Yeah, I think we would have been creating we would have created a different conversation a long time ago in terms of how we provide supports. Sadly, a lot of our crime is Indigenous on Indigenous crime. And if we're not healing all of our people, then we're leaving out a good chunk of people that need support. So they, shed some of that shame, they shed some of that anger, they learn a different way to live and, have a healthier lifestyle for themselves and their families, especially if the violence is involved.
Do you think maybe that's why we don't hear as much from leadership if it is two Indigenous people involved?
I think it's a really hard conversation. We hear a lot about, our women being taken, our people being taken by non-Indigenous people, but statistically, it's, Indigenous on Indigenous crime, and it's a really hard conversation to have, but it's one that we need to have because we need to heal as a people. And our men are suffering, our people are suffering, and if we don't do it now, then when? We can't keep having conversations about how we're going to heal our people and being judgmental of people who need that help. It's time to just put all of that aside and just create spaces for people to heal.
Isabel, a whole bunch more to talk about here. We just have to step aside for a quick break, okay, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Isabel Daniels, who is an advocate for exploited and vulnerable peoples. And before the break, we were talking about the lack of support, I guess, from leadership. Do you see much or any that you could talk of support out there on this issue from leaders?
I've had a couple conversations with Derek Nepanak, and he, we invited him to come speak at the healing gathering for murdered and missing Indigenous men, the families, and he agreed. E.J. Fontaine has also been a supporter of families that have lost their sons due to law enforcement, and just in general, murdered and missing Indigenous peoples. Kathy Merrick also was an advocate for murdered and missing Indigenous men and boys. But really, I haven't received a lot of support from leadership on murdered and missing Indigenous men. I've reached out to SEO in terms of trying to get support for the gathering. Was told that they don't provide support for men. The MMIW unit used to, but they're a project-based program and they no longer have that funding. AMC as well, no supports for the families of murdered and missing Indigenous men and boys. And it's a little frustrating to me because they are the three governing bodies of all of our nations in Manitoba. And I'm not sure why they don't provide supports for the families of murdered men and boys.
I mean, where does that leave you when you can't rely on those?
Well, I'm good at the nooks and crannies in my funding. Luckily, the funding that I have, I'm employed at the Inish Healing Center, and my job is the Indigenous Victim of Crime Liaison. And so as long as you're two-legged and Indigenous, then I can provide supports. But again, my funding is limited, and I can only do things at a micro level, and we need supports at a macro level for our people.
Exactly 4 years ago, APTN Investigates put out its own findings on MMIMB and identified more than 600 missing and murdered Indigenous men and boys since 1974, although even at that time the number was believed to be much higher. Each of those come with their own story, of course. As somebody who works in this so much, are there stories, lives that really stick with you?
One of the most recent ones that that really affected me was the case of Shelby Crate. He was a man that was killed in Fisher River, and it was one of the first cases that I was in. I got to see the process of what happened at sentencing and what's going on with the family and supporting the family. And it sticks out to me because the Crown can not be very empathetic when it comes to the family, and the sentences that were given to the offenders were not sufficient for the crime that they did. It was a very brutal homicide out in Fisher River, and it's just really hard to see what happened to the family after he was taken, and everything that they're going through currently and still going through. And then there's no supports for them. So just sitting with them and listening to them, and just hearing how unheard they've been throughout this whole process is really heartbreaking to me. And the other case would be a young man who was killed by law enforcement. He was shot 6 times, and the lack of support that mom received from leadership and from our people as a whole, from victim services, all that kind of the investigation, and how there will be nobody held accountable for her son's death, because he's considered a suspect, right, but didn't have a weapon and all that kind of stuff. So.
We touched on some of the issues here, lack of media coverage, leadership speaking out, the funding. What needs to change?
I think people just need to care. I mean, there's actually no funding model to support murdered and missing Indigenous men. So often when I was looking for funding for the gathering, oddly enough, it was Kingsman Charity Bingo that gave funding for the men's gathering, and that was the only organization that gave some funds towards travel so we can bring families in for the gathering. I've applied through family violence and was denied funding there. They said that it didn't really fit the model of family violence. So in reality, we need funding models to support and create initiatives for families of murdered and missing Indigenous men, and for men in general. We need safe spaces that are not homeless shelters for our men. That's the only place that our men get to go, is a homeless shelter. There's no domestic violence shelter for our men. There's no safe place for LGBTQ. There's only things that are being done at an individual level, but there's nothing done at an organizational level, and that really needs to change.
As we mentioned, you're a MMIWG family member. You advocate for a long time for exploited people, vulnerable people. Can you tell us a bit about your story?
So I grew up in Winnipeg. I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse and childhood exploitation. I was exploited when I was 12 years old by a gang here in Winnipeg. From there, I just, with that comes a lot of trauma and sexual assault survivor as well. And gang entrenched, all that kind of lovely stuff that society has to offer people. And then I lost my best friend, but before that I became a mom. And when I became a mom, I knew I wanted to live a different life, and I wanted to be able to provide my children with a different life that was given to me. And because that generation of our people are residential school survivors, and so we had a lot of broken homes in the 80s and the 90s and stuff like that. And things are changing because we're healing, but I wanted to change my life, and the only way I could do that is to go to all those dark places and to confront all of my hurt little selves, and now I'm able to sit here and survived all that and able to sit and have this conversation with you today. So.
And able to kick butt and not be afraid to speak some truths.
Yeah. I don't like having these uncomfortable conversations, but when you do it in a way where you're not lecturing a person about what they're not doing in community, but offer them, ask them, well, what would you do in a situation like this? How can we work together to create change for our people? And even if that doesn't happen right away, we can still plant seeds for change. And then hopefully by speaking to university students about, things that are still lacking in community today, maybe they'll use that and create a program when they graduate. And positivity also has a ripple effect in our community too, not just the negative.
Indeed. Isabel, hopefully some more we can chat about here. Just have to step aside for one last quick break, and then we'll continue the conversation here on Face to Face. Stick around. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Isabel Daniels, an advocate for exploited people, an MMIWG family member, and herself a survivor of human trafficking and childhood sexual exploitation. Isabel, as somebody who works with vulnerable people all the time, how often do you see things that happened in your life playing out again for others?
Every day. I think that when we work in community, it's important to take time to heal yourself, because it can be very triggering to see people in a position that you were, or in a state that you once used to be in, living a lifestyle, or maybe dealing with a person who was just assaulted, and that assault is very similar to something that I have gone through. But at the same time, it kind of makes me sad, because as much as things change, there's a lot of things that stay the same. And a lot of things that stay the same are the underbelly of Winnipeg, and that's where a lot of our hurt people are living right now. And as a society, I guess you don't really see it if you're not working in frontline or community work. Just the other day, I was having a conversation with people who were in a different profession, and they were quite shocked that these things happen in our city, and they didn't realize that this is life for some people in our province.
Right. What more do you think needs to be done for Indigenous peoples, vulnerable peoples, exploited peoples in Winnipeg?
I think that we need to move away from, we do need detox, and we do need rehab centers, and we do need all that we need all that support. We do need more of it. We need more that are close to Indigenous nations. We need to work together as a collective. We need to find ways to be self-sustainable as a people, not just in our communities, but individually as well. one thing that colonization was really good at was creating a dependency on funding, and that goes back to our Indian agents and stuff like that. So we need to learn and be confident that we have the ability to break free from all of this oppression, all of this systematic racism. We have the ability to live and create a better future for our children and our grandchildren.
Yeah, we got all these monies for all these things, but it still typically costs you $30,000 a month out of pocket to get yourself some help there.
Yeah, and then a lot of people who are doing supports for people are doing it at a community level with no funding. Most of the community work that I do that doesn't come from my job it comes out of my pocket, comes out of my pay, or comes out of things that I fundraise for. And our 3 governing bodies get millions of dollars in funding, and community just wants to see it come back to community.
Right. Well, Isabel, we thank you for all the work you do and for the speaking up and speaking out and for joining us on the show this week.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Happy to have done it. Glad we finally got to. That is all the time we have for this week's show. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy Miigwech. Thanks for being with us. We will see you back here in 7 days.